This is Bonjour Chai, the I've Got Schisms edition. I'm Avi Feingold, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltzbovy and special guest Eitan Hersh. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we talk about teaching conservative ideas to liberal students. We talk about the relationship between Zionists and anti-Zionists in rabbinical school. And we talk about whether we're headed for a big divide in the community or not. All this and more coming right up. Phoebe, how's it going?
All right. How are you doing, Avi?
Good. We have a guest with us today, as we often do. And this started because I saw an article in Boston Magazine online a little while ago, and it's the end of the school year, and I wanted to talk to him about this article. So I want to introduce Eitan Hersh, who is a professor of political science at Tufts University. Eitan, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Can you first tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us the quick rundown.
Sure. So professionally, I'm a political science professor at Tufts University in Boston. Most of my research is on U.S. elections, election administration, voting rights. I do work on civic engagement. And now about a third of my work is on what I would say is just Jewish topics related to studying anti-Semitism, studying Jewish engagement. So that's sort of like a post-tenure side hustle, side project that I enjoy working on.
I actually interviewed you once in a different capacity about, I think, the research you did on anti-Semitism. And what were the perhaps counterintuitive or unexpected findings there?
Oh, so a few years ago, so obviously before October 7th, I published with a grad student colleague. We wrote 3 articles on anti-Semitism among young adults, and we were trying to test some of the nuances of anti-Semitism, especially as they might emerge on the left or on the right. And so, the core findings are essentially that in terms of overt anti-Semitism, people who explicitly say, like, I don't like Jews, basically, you have a lot of young people on the far right who articulate that view. They do it more than older folks on the right and more than anyone on the left. On the left, you see a combination of 2 things. One is some kind of double standards in how they evaluate Jews versus other groups. And also, really very, very anti-Israel attitudes. It's not surprising. Young people on the left kind of think of Israel as an enemy state. And then patterns among young African-American Latinos that look kind of like the far right. That is, overt anti-Semitic attitudes similar to what you would find among like white alt-right people, you would find among young Black and Hispanics across the ideological spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So something, we're going to ask you about other stuff in a moment, but while we're on this, I really need to ask, do you think something profound would have changed in this regard since October 7th, as Israel becomes a more salient, topic in the news?
Well, I've been doing a lot of studies on this, on college campuses in particular, so surveys, focus groups, and, I think the basic results are the same, I would say. You still see young people on the right, actually, not very commonly, but more than on the left, will say negative things towards Jews. And then you see but very, very anti-Israel attitudes that, we could debate about whether they're anti-Semitic, but you see students talk about the Zionists, the rich Zionists, that Israel really shouldn't exist, that the Jewish population should be removed. So you see a lot of attitudes expressed that I think most Jews would find threatening to Jewish people.
Well, I think the most people would probably say Jews should be removed from Israel. Is there a debate about if that's anti-Semitic?
Well, what I would say is that the students that we study seem to try very hard to make that distinction in how they answer questions.
Mm-hmm.
So to take a step back, you were profiled in this magazine article, and I'm sure other places, but that's where I saw it, in that you wanted to do this grand experiment. Maybe it's not a grand experiment, but you were like, why shouldn't we be teaching conservative ideas to students who are generally in liberal campuses who might not be exposed to these ideas as, qua conservative ideas, as opposed to seeing them from a liberal lens as the first time that they're ever seeing them. Is that an accurate description of what some of the things you were doing on campus was?
Yeah, I just sort of thought there was a gap in our curriculum that we were graduating students who were political science majors or taking political science classes, but they really had very little exposure to not just perspectives, but whole topics whole topics that are central to the political identity of people on the right, like half the country. And, the great privilege of being an academic is I could just say like, okay, I'm going to spend a few months just reading obsessively to teach a new class that I want to teach. And so I craft this class. It's a bit different than other classes that I've seen around. There are other classes, mostly in history or the humanities, that might engage in conservative thought. But this is contemporary and it's policy oriented, and in some ways it's quantitative oriented. So we're choosing topics like family policy, religion in public life, guns, affirmative action, any topic like that, and then asking the question essentially like, how do people form their opinions about these topics? Where is there scientific evidence that supports or doesn't support one position or another? And what's nice about that is, it takes a little bit off. We're obviously talking about extremely sensitive topics, especially on a campus, but we take a little bit of the passion out of it in a way by saying, okay, like what would we want to know the answers to? Are there empirical questions we want to know the answers to that would help us evaluate what we think on of these issues, or is it just moral differences or whatever? But that's the class, and it's been really like the most wonderful teaching thing I've ever done.
So I was going to say, you're coming up on the end of the year now. You've probably taught it maybe more than once by this point.
Twice, yeah.
Twice. There you go. How did it work? And how did it work maybe at the beginning of the year where it was started before October 7th and it ended, towards the end? And the second semester, I'm guessing, ran into, I'm sure, tents that were pitched in the, at Tufts University. And did that change anything? What was the experience of teaching this, and what was the students' experience of telling you about what they got out of it?
Yeah, so I taught it actually twice in this past fall and then the previous fall. So the class is, I think, also very meaningful to the students who take it. It's obviously a self-selecting group that wants to take a class on conservatism. It's not like a required class. So they come in wanting to learn these things, but they come for different reasons, which makes the class pretty interesting. Some of them are themselves conservative, or they might be, or something like that. They're exploring those ideas to try to understand themselves. Most of the students are on the left, and then so they're trying to either just be smart or to understand what their opponents think. And there's a lot of people that are in neither of those categories really. They're just developing who they are. They don't have to have formed thoughts really about what they think. Sometimes they think of themselves as progressive, but they come from very conservative households or communities all over the country. Maybe they're gay and they come to a place like Tufts, they think of themselves as progressive, and then they think, okay, well, let me study conservatism, understand who my people are, and they realize, maybe on these issues they are pretty conservative too, and on some issues they're not. So it has a bit of everyone. Obviously, some topics are more sensitive than others. I think topics related to race are pretty sensitive. Affirmative action is like that. Welfare state stuff is like that. Incarceration. The gender and family stuff can be very sensitive and personal, right? So, I think when we talk about, it's funny because I teach class mostly on elections, and it's not that personal. People have opinions, but it's not like talking about divorce. Divorce is very personal to people. And so we talk about issues that are, some very sensitive like that, and some not so sensitive, like the regulatory state. What was different about October 7th was a couple things, because we were in the middle of the class during that. One thing, obviously, just to be completely honest, I was personally affected emotionally, whatever, by that issue differently than the other issues we talk about in class. So I think the article that you mentioned in Boston Magazine kind of referenced this.
You showed up to class disheveled and you were a little, but it's okay. It's a big moment. Yeah.
I wasn't sleeping very well. I was, and we had on our campus sort of it was one of these campuses where students right after October 7th were championing it. We're championing the terrorist attacks. And that when I think about the whole arc of this school year, that's the thing that still sticks in my head. That's the thing that I can't get over. That's hard for me to get over, that we had students on October 8th who were like, yay. And so, I think that was and then in the class, and this was clear in the article, there were kids on very, very opposite sides of this, from the sort of Hamas is totally justified to this is terrible. And so it was a hard issue to deal with the class. Most of the class, this didn't come up, right? So it was it came up, the October 10th or something like that. And then after that, in the semester, the whole like university as a news topic became like a national and international story. And in some ways that was interesting to experience during our class time, but that wasn't really directly relevant to our class material, except to say very much in our class material, dating back for 70 years, conservatives have been worried that universities have not done a good job presenting different sides of issues or taking seriously conservative ideas. And I think that the school year we just saw brought home the need for classes like this.
So I was thinking, the aspect of this that I keep thinking about is just what constitutes conservative and how that's in flux or not.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no point in which I say this is what it means to be conservative. The conservative thinkers that we're reading disagree with each other very strongly about that. We see the different wings of conservatism. We can understand why there's this, libertarian libertarian type wing of the party and where that of the Republican Party or of the conservative movement, and how that is in tension with more cultural or religious conservatives. We have kind of like small conservatives who just don't like big things. They don't like big government, but they also don't like big business.
If I could just interrupt, because there's just, I guess what I'm sort of trying to figure out is like things that seem conservative on a college campus might not in the general population. Like if somebody's all in for Biden on a college campus, maybe they would seem conservative. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's a good question. I guess I don't know how that's true. I don't know about this year, but maybe previous years, like the whole like college Democratic club was all in for Bernie Sanders. And they exactly like you're saying, they thought someone like Biden or Clinton were too conservative. I think that the syllabus is based on what I think any person who conservative movement or from conservative think tanks would say, yes, this is basically is what we mean. It could be that some position like children in schools should be referred to by their birth genders is coded as conservative to the students, but moderate in America. I don't know. I mean, I sort of like, I guess I don't know exactly how they think of these different policy positions, but yeah, I guess that's a good, interesting question. I mean, I should talk to my students about that.
We have been concerned here on the show, and I've been concerned broadly in thinking about this with the idea that, like, especially post October 7th, what we have been seeing is this reckoning with what we would perceive perhaps as the left, right, or the radical left, or however we're going to call it, people that are anti-Zionist or a-Zionist or recognize that it's complicated, and yet still want to be part of the Jewish community, and that this is tearing the community apart in a way that liberal and conservative values seem to be tearing certain, populations apart elsewhere in the secular world. Again, the events of the past several months have shown us that there's a lot more Jews in the community that think differently than what the establishment has been said that this is the pervading value in the community until now. And now we have to reckon with this idea that it's complicated. Yeah,
I think that organizations have to grapple with this. You can see sort of subcategories of the Jewish community splintering in different ways. So in these surveys that I've been doing recently with a Jewish foundation called the Jim Joseph Foundation, I was just looking at this. So, if you're looking at what is the predictor of someone who holds, say, like a view that they don't think Israel should be a Jewish country and that they're attending pro-Palestine events on campus, what's the predictor of that kind of profile of student? It's not so much their Jewish background. The biggest predictor is that they're ideologically left. And even bigger than that, the biggest predictor is that they identify as queer, LGBT, non-binary. And like that's basically a sub community within the Jewish community that we've seen this year has like very, very different preferences about Israel than in the people who identify as straight. And it's not clear from academic research why that's the case. I think it's surprising. It has been a surprise to many people in the Jewish community that there is this strong relationship between queer identity and pro-Palestine organizing. And so that's sort of like a sub group of a group, and so some organizations want to focus on that and some don't, and so I think like there's no one of course, I don't know if it's different in Canada, but, there's no like one Jewish organization that's in charge of this stuff, right? So it's just sort of like different organizations figuring out who their audience is, what their goals are.
I do think, though, that there's a lack of an attempt to understand why so many of these students are thinking like this. And it's not just, well, this is the community you come from. There's no grappling with the question of like, hey, they're not stupid students. They're not like silly. They're not just like being caught up in the zeitgeist. They must have some values that are driving them in this direction. And what's making them want to be very, very Jewish, want to identify strongly as Judaism, and having these types of conversations of what you're doing, like, for example, in this classroom. And that was my immediate thought is like, no, that's what we have to be doing.
Yeah. I've spent my whole year doing what you're suggesting no one's doing, and so I'm doing it, right? So like I just did 12 focus groups of Jewish students, non-Jewish students, some focus groups separate, some together. We're doing surveys. We're trying to understand who the students are, where they're coming from. But I take your point. It's important to do. It's important to understand where students are coming from, why they it's also important to understand like the rates at which these things happen. So if you look at the Jewish students, it's a very small share that are actually engaged that don't think that Israel should be a Jewish country. It's something like 15% of them.
That's still a lot of people, right? We used to think that, but we still used to think that those people were completely out of the camp of Judaism. We don't want to talk about them. We don't want to think about them. And now all of a sudden you're realizing that 15%, right, of a population, that's still something that you have to answer to. You can't just write them out.
Right. So, yeah, right. So, I think that thinking through, understanding where they're coming from on the issues and understand it, then, yeah, I actually think there's a lot of energy around this question.
I can't date women right now because I'm too busy calling myself a piece of shit.
I had a dysfunctional Jewish mother and I had a dysfunctional Native mother.
I had 25 full years of utter struggle and failure.
I started to realize the absurdity of my inability to let go of this monster of guilt.
Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Hi, I'm Ralph Benrig. I'm the host of Not That Kind of Rabbi, where we look at people's spiritual journeys and take a little time for their self-reflection, and maybe yours. You can get it all at thecjn.ca/NTKR, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I don't know if you saw this, but there was a op-ed in the Forward this week from two students who dropped out of the RSC, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, saying that they left because there was such anti-Israel sentiment within the school, and they just didn't feel like there was space for them within a Zionist students, and saying, this is what we believe. And this to me really highlights exactly what I've been asking and talking about, that once a certain opinion is established as the established opinion, then you have nothing to, like these two students made it seem, was that there was nothing for them to be able to talk about because they weren't allowed to have these opinions. I'm curious, I guess, is how much does the airing of both sides, it seems like the type of courses that you are putting together would allow for these types of opinions to be flourishing on both sides, for people to be able to have these types of dialogues and for it to be passionate, but still human. And, I guess I'm curious as to the future of the rabbinate, if we think about things going in this direction.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, in the sense that, look, the goal of this class certainly is not to get students to be conservative or to be liberal or anything. That's never the goal of a class. But I do hope that the students realize the complexity of issues and understand why people reach different conclusions that they do, and are not evil for doing that, right? I think that getting students to realize, like, okay, there are increasingly people who are being called Christian nationalists in the United States, who want some policies that are different from definitely what the liberal students want. Where is that coming from? Why do people reach those conclusions? What can we learn about them? What do we have in common with them? What don't we have in common with them? And I think like that turns out to be a very helpful and clarifying exercise, because you kind of realize that, oh yeah, all this stuff is pretty complicated and life is full of compromises, and you know what, like, no one community is perfect for you. If you're a Democrat in America, like, you probably don't agree with everything the Democrats think, it would be surprising if you agree with your party and everything. It'd be surprising if you're in a shul and you agree with the rabbi on everything. Or it'd be surprising if you're in a school.
You put a Kurtzer on for about a year and a half ago about schools and Jewish day schools, and he said that the most you can ever expect of your kid's Jewish day school to align with what you're interested in is about 70 to 75%. And
right. But that doesn't mean that the school can't have the dominant values, right? In other words, like I just came from my kids' school's Shabbaton. We were at a summer camp. There was hundreds of people. It was wonderful. At the beginning, the rabbi of the school says, people have different customs at home. Make sure that you are not using technology on Shabbat, okay? And in front of anyone. This is not an Orthodox school. It's a plural school. You don't have to take offense if you use your phones on Shabbat. That the expectation of the community is something different. And I think that on some issue, there's so many issues that when people disagree with each other. Now, sometimes you create a new school or a new shul every time you disagree, but that comes at a great cost to the community. And I think that with respect to Israel, the dominant, by far the dominant position in the Jewish community and in the Jewish organizations is one that holds a safe and secure Jewish state in Israel as one of its core values. That doesn't mean everyone has to fall in line, but you can expect, if you're in the sort of minority view, to have to deal with that minority status, just as you might have to deal with a minority status on any other issue for which there is a dominant view in the community. Now, we can encourage, and we should, I think, just like in a university setting, people to try to understand each other and empathize with each other. Why do people reach different conclusions? But in the end, institutions, whether they're private universities or private Jewish day schools or synagogues, like, have some norms and values that define who they are. And I don't think we have to shy away from that and become relativist about everything.
So I have a question to bring it back to academia a little bit. I remember being, a more Zionist student in a French PhD program at New York University where that was not a very common thing. And it would be a little awkward, but at the same time, there was this norm. So I got my degree in 2013. There was still very much a norm that, like, professors were not going to say their politics in a very blunt way in a class, and neither were students. And things were generally like, professors might be in their own lives having strong political views, but they, on the whole, were not coming in and saying, I'm going to give you a bad grade if you have the wrong politics or something like this. What I've noticed following just in the news since October 7th, and especially more to the point since the encampments, that there are professors saying both, I stand with the students, by which they mean with the protesters, some of whom are not students, which is a side topic, and some saying that they oppose the protests and think it's terrible, making it that there seems to be like a new blurring of the role of sort of professors' politics in everything. That line seems to be crossed constantly in a way that I don't remember it being crossed constantly in the past. And I guess I'm wondering, it's kind of a two-part question. One is whether you've seen this generally, and two is whether your students are fascinated by where you stand politically on everything and how you approach that.
So I think there's always been some of this, but I would actually make the cut point as the Trump election. I think that there was a move after Trump that we are on the anti-Trump side. And even I remember I was teaching at Yale when Trump was elected, and the university sent out this email to the university, almost like they send almost the same language they use when a student, God forbid, commits suicide. It was an email like, if you need mental health counseling, if you need, we're here for you. It's like, there's no way, I thought to myself, they would have sent this email out if Hillary Clinton had won. And I think that there became a norm in not just in teaching, but like in academic, when you give a paper, give a research paper where someone might ask the question in the audience, like another fellow academic, as if they're expecting you and them to be on the same side in a fight for progressive politics. And so I think that norm has really changed over time, but I would peg it to the Trump election.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. In
terms of my own politics, like, I want the students to understand me as complicated person with complicated values, and I want to understand them that way too. They get whiffs of things, right? There's actually a picture in my office of me and my wife and Joe Biden that was taken from a while ago. I think it's cool to have a photo of you with a sitting president. I think that's cool. I think that they can see that I am probably on the left on some issues and on the right on some issues.
But do you think they care?
I think they're interested in it. Yeah, I think they care. I think some students maybe won't even take my class. Forget the class on conservatism. They might not take my class on elections if they think that I'm, don't agree with them.
Well, that's interesting. So I've taught as an adjunct French classes, not that recently, but I remember once seeing that there was I got a rate my professors from somebody saying her politics are like terrible, but she doesn't mention it in class, so she's good. And I don't even know what they meant, like which politics or what they'd found that I'd written. But yeah, I think students are interested even in non-poli-sci type contexts. But I just want to talk about like this sort of the Jewish angle on these ideological divides, because so I just wrote for the Canadian Jewish News' print magazine a review of two of the many Jewish, mainly American, some Canadian, some British writers who seem to be really like in this kind of heterodox space, right? Like I have observed just in general that there seems to be some kind of connection between being Jewish and having these kind of heterodox views and feeling like you just aren't going to fit anywhere politically. I don't like the expression politically homeless because it seems a little bit silly, but like, do you think
cosmopolitan?
Exactly. Do you think there is something that makes Jews perhaps overrepresented in the world of people whose politics are hard to pin down, or is it just conversely that everybody's politics are hard to pin down? And I'm more aware of people who are Jewish whose politics are hard to pin down.
Right. Like my own impression is similar to your impression, which is that Jews are represented well in these kinds of spaces. And okay, let me give an example to work through why I think that it might be so. When I think of something like, let's talk about Christian nationalism, I talk about in class like this. I talk about how, is it bad? Some of the students want to know to say, Merry Christmas. Should institutions, should government workers be saying Merry Christmas to you? And I say something like, well, I don't know, in my neighborhood, if you kind of are walking around on a Saturday dressed relatively nicely, people are going to say Shabbat Shalom to you. And whether they won't know if you're Jewish, probably. If you're just dressed nicely, if you look at a certain way, they're gonna. And is it because they want the whole world to be Jewish? No, they're just like, it's just a norm of behavior that creates a sort of a nice festive environment. And, there's a light Christian nationalism that's essentially doing the same thing. There's also a big movement in the United States related to this since COVID, just in the last 4 years, where now like almost a dozen states are allowing people to have vouchers of $6,000 or $8,000 to be used if they want to send their kids to religious schools or to home schools or whatever. Now, a lot of people on the left don't like that. They think it's destroying public schools. It's destroying the public space. But as someone who sends their kids to Jewish parochial school, I totally get it. It's very hard without having a lot of money, try to create a community and try to transmit religious values. And so I understand why people would do that. I totally get it. Now, why am I saying this? Because there's a whole lot I probably don't agree with evangelical Christians about. And there's probably a version of Christian nationalism that not only do I not like, but is threatening to Jews. And so I'm in a hard place because it's actually like the sense in which I adopt conservative values are coming from a religious space for me. That is, the reason I feel like I empathize with so much of what the Christian right is saying is because of my Jewish values. And at the same time, I can feel apart from those Christian values. And that puts you, I'm not saying everyone in the heterodox academy space or whatever is coming from that, has that view. I'm just saying that's exactly the kind of situation where you can be like, I'm sort of like sympathetic to what's going on the right, but I'm not really of the right. And I'm like, but like it distinguishes me from the left too. And so I think a lot of things are kind of like that.
That's so interesting. And it's so interesting that you bring up also something that isn't even about Zionism. So another thing that I was wondering about, and that reading those books made me think about and just observing how things are going, is that so these are two books by authors who were very put off by so-called wokeness in like 2020, 2021. And that's kind of where they were coming from. So they're overall liberal, but then, put off by progressive excesses or whatever. But many, many North American, maybe especially Canadian Jews are very much progressive and had been very much on board through 2020, 2021, 2022 with kind of like in this house we believe type politics. And I'm wondering, as somebody who studies politics, like what's coming of them politically now? Are they feeling torn because they are in some sense or another Zionists? Are they anti-Zionist and not bothered? How does it all break down?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the classic work of social science about exit, voice, and loyalty, right? Mm-hmm. Some who are in the progressive camp will and have exited that camp because they think it's just no longer consistent with their values. And I see some students who are like that, like they identified as progressive as part of their core identity, but now progressive can mean like Hamas curious, and they're like, I'm out of here. That's not who I am. Others think that, no, they need to stay in those progressive spaces and voice if they're Zionist positions and say, this is actually consistent with my progressive values. It's consistent with indigenous people having self-autonomy or whatever. And then there are ones that they are loyal to the progressive values, and the progressive values now mean opposing a Jewish state, then they will move in the direction of the leaders that they take seriously. I mean, if you're of the far left because you're interested in the labor movement or you're interested in rights movements, and so you take someone like Ayanna Pressley or AOC as your thought leader, and then that person says, yeah, and by the way, like Israel's an enemy state, then you say, okay, I guess that's I guess that's where I am. So I think we're going to see all kinds of people. And obviously, depending on where you sit in the Jewish community, you'll see more of one versus the other of that.
Do you think that, looking at it within the Jewish community, do you think that this question of Zionism versus anti-Zionism or a-Zionism, or however we're going to call it, has the potential to really become schismatic within the Jewish community? Yeah,
I mean, I would say that I think the bigger question is how the increasingly secular diaspora left thinks about the increasingly religious Israeli right. There was a Pew study. I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but it's something like, a lot of, say, Reform or non-affiliated American Jews think they have like less in common with Orthodox Jews than they have with secular Christians, and maybe it's the opposite too. That Orthodox Jews maybe have more in common with religious Christians than they have with secular Jews. I think that to me the big question is really about like how those communities see themselves with one another. I think that relates very strongly to the question of the future of Zionism, anti-Zionism debates. I mean, I think that because Zionism is so strongly associated with religious engagement right now, that is, if you go to an Orthodox synagogue, you're not only going to see a very Zionist community, you're going to see people who have more family connections. Their kids live in Israel or have served in the IDF. That there's going to be much more cross connection to Israel as a people. And obviously, like, the future holds, who knows? I mean, it depends on the future governments of Israel. It depends on future governments of the United States. I think that there are American anti-Zionists who really... And Zionists who like don't know how they see a sort of like right-wing people living in the West Bank. Are they part of their community or not? Are they family and friends, or are they enemies? I think that there's like a real tie between the religious question and the Zionist question.
Do you think that it has the potential of being a schism like the Karaites and the Rabbinites, where it really, really broke apart, or is it more Hasidism and Misnagdism or whatever, where it ultimately resolved itself and there are still very big differences, but they still really feel like they're part of the same big tent?
So I think it's going to be like neither of those.
Not that you're a Jewish historian, but you probably have an opinion.
But my opinion is that basically, and the reason I brought up the religious thing is in part because of this: the more engaged Jewish community, those who are in organizations, leading organizations, donating to organizations, doing Jewish stuff in their homes, are way more Zionist than the ones who are not. And so there is going to be and continue to be a huge amount of assimilation of Jews in America, and I presume in Canada, although I know nothing about Canada, into the just sort of like the secular, non-religious crowd. And I think that they're not going to reform. I doubt that they will reform Jewish organizations because it's so correlated with their level of engagement. There's an amazing quote that I love from a bunch of years ago. So Abraham Foxman was a longtime head of the ADL, and there was a survey that came out that said that Jews in America were way to the left on Israel than the Jewish establishment, essentially, was how this was framed. And Foxman was asked, I think by the Forward or by the Jewish press, what do you think of that? And he said, without missing a beat, this amazing line, which he said, I don't represent Jews. I represent Jews who care. And at the time, I was very opposed to Foxman and personally, and did not think that his values aligned with mine. And I was mad that he said that. And so I downloaded the data that this survey was come from, and I would say, okay, let's understand how we would define Jews who care. Maybe it's who are members of an organization, maybe who light Shabbos candles, whatever it is. No matter how you define it, Foxman is right. That is, if you look at the Jewish community as defined by people who are actively engaged in Jewish organizations or in Jewish ritual life, they are very Zionist. And so like the longer answer to your question is that it might not look like a schism. It might just look like the Jews who are, for a variety of reasons, not leaning into their Jewish identity, hold the strong anti-Zionist views, and they're not going to build institutions around that.
The past 6 months have really shown the opposite to be true, that there are tremendous amount of people that are very Jewishly engaged that want to have Seders and Shabbos. And, I speak to rabbinic colleagues of mine who tell me that they're very Orthodox, their kids are very Orthodox, and their kids have big problems with them coming to shul even because they feel like synagogue is Zionist and home is Zionist, and they don't feel comfortable in those spaces anymore. So
I think that, different synagogues or different religious leaders are going to see whether they can craft a space for that. Can they create a summer camp? Can they create a day school? Can they create a synagogue? And maybe they can. I think the numbers are really small, actually. So I don't think that they can. But, who knows? The future will tell us.
That's right. We'll bring you back in 200 years or your AI avatar with all of your mind in there, and we'll ask and see what happens in 200 years from now. But like you said, it's an open question. Eitan Hersh, thank you so much for coming on. Please come back anytime. It's been great talking.
My pleasure. Take care.
Are you in the market for a new watch or a special piece of jewelry? Are you looking for the perfect engagement ring to pop the question? Atelier Lou has all this and more. Eric and the team at Atelier Lou can craft a piece for you, or you can select from some of the exclusive designers that they offer. From a simple bangle to a statement necklace, Atelier Lou can make you or your loved ones sparkle. Located in the heart of Westmount in Montreal or online at atelierlou.com, visit Atelier Lou for your next watch or jewelry purchase. And when you do, make sure to use promo code BON18 for 10% off your next purchase. That's atelierlou.com.
And now it's time on the show for our nachas. Phoebe, you must have nachas.
I've got nachas. And it is from the Jewish Chronicle, although it is about the United States. It's a headline reading, Jewish couple become, quote, world's oldest newlyweds, end quote, with a combined age of 202. So I saw this headline and I thought, in what way is this age distributed? I became fascinated by the possibility that there is, a big age gap and that one of them is 180 years old or something like that. But in fact, no. Marjorie Fitterman, 102, and Bernie Littman, 100, younger man, tied the knot. Let them repopulate the world. No, it's lovely. Mazel tov to them. I thought that was an enjoyable story. Avi, what have you got?
Okay. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there is settler colonialist conspiracies that exist in the zoological world.
What?
And I was made aware of this, and I will explain a little bit, by somebody that I've been following for a while. His name is Natan Slifkin. He is a Haredi, but no longer in the Haredi world. He has a a Substack called Rationalist Judaism, but he went and did a digression recently on his Substack where he pointed out that there are people who want to claim that zoology has a hand in settler colonialism. And he points out the work of this woman, Iris Braverman, who wrote a book called Settling Nature, the Conservation Regime in Palestine, Israel. And she talks about attempts to bring fauna, for example, deer that were indigenous to Israel or may not have been indigenous to Israel. And that's her whole project, back into Israel in the 50s when Israel was, repopulating the land and doing their thing. And I'm not going to get into the politics of what happened then, but this woman is claiming that when they brought animals from other countries back into Israel, that was settler colonialism, and that this is a big problem for the Zionist project. And he goes and, as somebody who has a zoological background and is a rabbi and is a Zionist, goes and step by step takes down this entire argument. And I thought it was wonderful to see. It was like old school, early 2000s, 2010s blogs of looking for all these, things that people talk about and then publishing 20,000 words showing how it's not the case. This was exactly that. And it was a hoot to read. And I highly encourage that you go check out Rationalist Judaism for this and other wonderful rationalist parts of Jewish life.
That's interesting. Can I just ask a question about it, though?
Please. I was hoping you would.
Yes. So I'm not a zoologist, shocking everybody here, but wouldn't it be possible that even if a species, now I'm talking about animals here, not people, wouldn't it be possible that if a species, even if it was indigenous to a particular area thousands of years prior, if it's brought in now, would disturb the ecosystem as it currently existed? And does he address that? So
I do believe he addresses that. I'm trying to remember. It was the whole blog post was or the Substack was in 3 different parts. I'm going to leave the zoological details to him because it is not my level of expertise, but it was fascinating to read nonetheless. And yes, those things are addressed as well. Thank you again, Al. This is a great show.
Yeah. Thank you, Avi.
Great to do stuff. Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending May 25th, Shabbat Parashat Behar. The show is produced by Michael Freeman and edited by Zach Kaufman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways that we get new listeners. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest-running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.